going on, guys? My name is Austin, and today I'm going to run you down on a few little projects that I have going on my 1996 Nissan 240 SX. This car is going to have a super cool engine swap that's very seldomly been done before on any chassis, let alone a Nissan specific rear-wheel drive chassis. And in this video, I'm going to run you down on exactly why and how I'm going to do it. I bought the car for a Mercedes-Benz, 1990 Mercedes-Benz 560 SEL. I traded straight across for that car. The car that when I got it had a KA turbo setup with a blown bottom end, of course, which is the same story for most KAT cars that I see around. Is the bottom ends just don't hold up to the power when you want to make anything above 300 wheel horsepower. And some people do it, and some people have done it, but in this particular car, it just had a spun rod bearing. It looked like it was an unopened block. It's probably the original block to the car, so it probably had around 180,000 miles on it, which is pretty good for a KA. But that's just about the end of its life before it's going to need a pretty substantial rebuild. I was looking into the KA turbo stuff, and I was seeing that a lot of guys are making really good power with KA turbo setups, but you have to spend a pretty large sum of money to make them even partially capable of doing that kind of power. And I'm a Euro guy, so if I could put a Euro engine into a JDM car, that would sort of clash both of those things together. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a European engine into a Japanese car, and I'm going to end up with a VR6 turbo setup that's hopefully going to be around 500 wheel for hopefully total under $3,000. It's going to be a super cool little project, and I really hope that it brings awareness to that motor, because it is a really good motor. We have one here. This is a B4 Passat. This is like a between, I believe it was 1994 or 5 all the way up to I believe the B4 Passat was replaced in 1998 by the B5. And this one came factory with the VR6 and a 5-speed manual transmission, but this motor is pretty darn far from stock. It should be pushing numbers at around 500-ish horsepower. It's got a Turbonetics 62 trim turbo that unfortunately blew up, so we're going to change that up soon. But yeah, this motor has been reliable for a pretty darn long time while making a really good amount of power in really fast passes down the drag strip here in Washington State. This car is running a Lugtronic or VEMS ECU system for complete standalone engine management and all that stuff. It's supposed to be making around 20 to 24 pounds of boost and putting down 500 wheel horsepower. And it's still running most of its compression. So a lot of guys are running 8-to-1 compression. This motor is running 9.5-to-1 compression. And this is my roommate's car. It's an upgraded MSD ignition system and a big SPA, the cheapest intake manifold that you can buy, which makes it kind of a pain, but it cleans up the engine bay quite a bit, and I'll show you around it here in a few. I have quite a bit of experience with the VR6 engine. I've built a few of them, and I know that they're more than capable of making really good power reasonably affordably. I know that my other buddy who's just slightly down south, he has a VR6 car that routinely hits dyno pulls at anywhere between 420 to 440 horsepower, and that's a completely stock bottom end. I don't even think he has rod bolts in it. I know he has head studs, and I know he's running 8-to-1 compression, which is still really impressive. But basically the pros and cons of the VR6, we'll start with the pros, of course, because we're adults here. The pros are it's super cheap. You can pick up a complete long block VR6 with a whole bunch of extras for like 150 bucks. And then you can get the ECU and everything thrown in there with the stock front wheel drive transmission for around 300 bucks. And then the turbo kit you can piece together for under 1,000 bucks. And there's 500 wheel horsepower right there with, of course, you don't even need to upgrade the radiator. The stock radiator's plenty for it. They have really good electric fans from factory because it is a front wheel drive car, of course. The only thing you really have to upgrade is the fuel pump and injectors, and after that you're seeing it at 500 wheel horsepower almost every day on the dot, as long as the motor's reasonably healthy. Now if you take that block apart, you put rod bolts, head studs, and just hardware in it, not even touching the internals, replacing rod bearings, main bearings, and piston rings, then you have a super reliable all day, everyday car that'll last for thousands and thousands of miles without giving you any headaches or issues. the VR6 motor, when it came out, was way ahead of its time as far as technology is concerned. I think it was released in 1991 in the Volkswagen Passat. And then later in 1992 for the SLC Corrado, which everybody's super familiar with. And that motor makes 171 horsepower and 173 pound-feet of torque out of a 2.8 liter VR6 in a super small package. And we were looking at things, and I have a VR6 block right there and a KA24 block right there. And the VR6 block is lighter weight than the KA24 block, and it's got more displacement, so at 2.8 liters, and it's got 2 more pistons, but it's the same footprint. And we were looking at other things. The intake manifold and exhaust manifold setup on this particular car is actually smaller than the turbo setup that I was running with the stock intake manifold on the KA24. So it's smaller, more compact, lighter weight, and it's way more capable of power, way more reliably as well. And so that's something that I've always really wanted, is a car that's fun to drive, rear-wheel drive, with a really good head, made for really solid power that you can still rev over 7,000 RPM reliably and boost to the moon. My goal for this VR6 motor is not even to have big power. I only really want 350 horsepower out of this car because that's plenty for what I want to do. And so the VR6 engine really just makes sense for that application. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a CD009 transmission, which is going to be perfect. It can withstand, there's people who are making 1,000 horsepower with those completely factory trans with just a clutch. And then a guy, I believe he's in Canada, I don't know where in Canada, I think his name's Trevor. He has a white S14 with a 4L8, I think it's either a turbo 400 or a 4L80E transmission. But he does sub 10-second quarter miles with a VR6 engine in his 240SX, and it's an S14 too, which is exactly what I'm putting it in. But yeah, that's the plan, is to put a CD009 behind a VR6 with a turbo and make roughly 350 to 400 horsepower reliably all day, every day, and daily drivable capability with air conditioning, all the goodies that I could even potentially want. We're going to retain the S14 air conditioning system, so we're going to make a bracket to fit the AC pump in there with all the lines, so everything bolts up factory. Luckily the car already came turbo, so I've got a whole bunch of things that I can use from there. I'll be using the tile wastegate and the HKS blow-off valve, and a whole bunch of the intercooler piping I'll be able to reuse because a lot of it's in the same spot. And then beyond that, it's just a matter of making it happen and making it work. And then for engine management, I'm going to be running the a Speedy EFI system, which is very similar to Megasquirt, but at a much better price point, and it works the same. It's even tuned with Tuner Studio, so it's completely compatible with all the Megasquirt guys. So all the tuners that can tune Megasquirt can tune Speedy EFI, but at a much lower cost. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. We're going to do Speedy EFI, VR6 Turbo, CD009, 240SX. And it's probably going to be one of the coolest builds, hopefully this side of the state. I'm hoping, at least. The shell is really clean. That's one thing that I'm really pleased with about this S14, is the shell is very, very clean. It's a clean title, clean shell, non-sunroof, power locks, power windows, S14 Zenki. It's 96. And yeah, I'm super stoked. So I'm going to have you guys follow me along the way, and we're going to figure this out together, and I'll document everything, take photos, take video, and explain exactly why and how we're going to do this. It's going to be a very, very cool little setup in this car. Super small packaging, but tons of power. And that's what I'm really stoked about most for this swap. So this is my roommate Chase. This is his VR6 turbo setup, and I'll bring him out one of these days to explain it to you guys in more depth. But this is essentially the packaging that's going to be happening on this VR6 turbo setup. My only real issue is with that manifold, but we'll talk about that later. So essentially what this motor is a completely rebuilt 2.8 VR6 long block. So we put piston rings, main rods, main bearings, and in this motor, and just essentially freshened it up, and then slapped his existing turbo setup on it. So he was already running a Turbonetics, like I said, Turbonetics 62 trim turbo, and you know, just it's the perfect setup really for a medium horsepower VR6 engine that's really tuned for budget efficiency. So no money was wasted on this car. There's no pointless things that some people end up doing with other swaps. So everything has a function and nothing is wasted. So he bought the MSD coil packs for the ignition system because they're just the most efficient, strongest system for this car. And he had to terminate the end. So these are just factory Mark IV VR6, so 1999 to 2005 VR6 spark plug leads that have been cut at the end and then terminated with MSD plug-ins. So it's still a super simple, easy thing to do that anybody can do really, as long as you have some mechanical know-how and you know how to squeeze your hands like that. So nothing is really crazy special about this car other than the fact that it's a VR6 and nobody does VR6. The support for them is surprisingly decent for what it is, but not many people are really into Volkswagens. Like, they're not a huge audience, not even close to the 240 or the S chassis audience. It's not even close. They're just small, lightweight, and practical, and they do not fail. They're dead nuts reliable. They do not fail. But essentially, this is it. I think he has 1,000cc injectors. He has that Turbonetic 62 trim turbo and a Lugtronic ECU, so he's running VEMS, and just an eBay intercooler, and just like random boost piping that's like not even like specifically made for this platform. It's all very universal stuff, and he just made it work. And so this is the basic turbo setup that will probably be going into my car. It's really nothing special. It's just a good, solid, basic engine package that just functions very well. And this motor will probably end up dynoing around 500 wheel horsepower reliably all day, every day, on around 20 pounds of boost. The one thing, he does have a 268 cam in there. I forgot about that. He does have a 268, so a pretty mild cam in that engine. And it's in a wagon, which is super cool. You don't see a lot of people doing wagons anymore, but Chase is doing the Wago, and I'm really proud of that because it's a really cool car, and he still has full exhaust. It's nothing crazy. It's just a fun Passat GLX wagon, and it just works, and it's fast, really fast. And this is the car that I'm putting the VR6 in. This is my 1996 S14 Zenki, which is a manual, slick top, electric mirrors, electric windows, electric locks, factory manual car with a very clean interior and gauge pods that need to go away. And the only things that are really missing in this car, sorry for the mess, is that carpet on the door panel, and right back here, the parcel shelf tray, I guess is what they call that. And it's got some pretty hideous carbon wrap on the end, but most of the things on this car are actually really well done. So it has a proper HKS high power exhaust, which I will be keeping. Most of it, at least. I'll probably have to modify some of it. And I traded a kooky front, because all the kooky fanboys, I just wanted to make you guys mad, for a very clean original Zenki front with upgraded and modified projector headlights with clear lenses. But yeah, this is going to be the car that it's all going in, and I'm super excited for it, and it's going to be super fun. All right, so here is the bottom end of a KA24 DE. You can tell it's a DE because of the piston skirt oil squirters. And this is the bottom end of a VR6 out of a Volkswagen. This one particularly, I believe, is out of a Passat, so a 96 or some odd Passat. I believe this is an OBD2 engine, which is the same as OBD1 as far as hardware goes, but the difference is all of the top end. So anything outside of the engine is the big difference, and there are a few different mounting positions for certain things on this VR6 for OBD2 and OBD1. There are a few slight differences. As far as KAs, all KA24 DE blocks, as far as I know, are 99.9% the same. The only real difference is the front timing covers between S13 and S14, as far as I know, and Xterra, and Ultima and stuff like that. Front wheel drive applications and rear wheel drive applications are slightly different. I believe the biggest difference between all of them is the front timing covers and the crankshaft itself. And so here I'm going to show you why the VR6 makes so much sense in an already 4-cylinder application. So I'm going to pull out the tape measure and measure the bottom end of this block. And you can see that right there is a good 10 inches, almost flat. And this is just a little bit under 10 inches. So the VR6 is actually smaller as far as crankcase size at its smallest point. And even if we go to the widest point, which is right at the front of the engine, you can still see it's almost the exact same as the KA24 at its widest point. Maybe a little bit larger at its widest point. But it's so similar in size, and it's so efficient, and it's got 6 cylinders and more displacement that it almost makes no sense to stick with the 4-cylinder application when you are familiar with this sort of engine, specifically the VR6. It just makes so much sense. And the 3.6, which they also make, they make a VR6 all the way down from 2.5 liters in China only, all the way up to, I believe, 3.6 liters, which is in the Porsche Macan and the Volkswagen Atlas, and I think it's still currently sold in the Passat, but I could be totally wrong. But that is essentially why the VR6 makes so much more sense than the KA24 for me, because I'm familiar with it. The other benefit of it is it's much easier to get on standalone because the crank trigger is so simple and it just makes sense. So you can see this gear here on the actual crankshaft of the car. That actually helps the crankshaft position sensor figure out exactly where this bottom end is in relation to the top end of the car. And so the crank sensor trigger is so much easier to work with than to buy a different crank sensor trigger and make it work on the KA. It just doesn't make sense for me because it's so much more finicky and does not work as well. This is easy and almost drop-in plug and play. So the mounting position on the VR6 engine is actually very similar to what's already there on the KA24. The mounts do not need to be modified very much, and if they do, they're still stamped steel, so it's super simple to make happen. And same on the other side. Like, I don't know why more people don't do this. It makes so much sense. It's very, very, very easy. And the sump for this car, so the sump, which is the oil pan, is about the same size as a KA24 factory oil pan, just a little bit bigger. But this motor does hold more oil capacity, and they do not have oiling issues. The KA24 doesn't either, but the oiling system on the VR6 is much more robust than the KA24. That's another reason why it makes more sense. These things don't spin rod bearings. KAs are known for spinning rod bearings. And I don't want to deal with that anymore. So I'm just going to deal with the VR6. I'm going to make it work, and it's going to be super, super awesome. Very powerful and super fun. I'm not going to go big turbo like most people do. I'm going to stick to below a 60 trim. So I think I'm going to go right around a 57, 58 trim turbo. Keep it pretty small. I don't need a lot of air. It doesn't need to make big power. It just needs to spool up and make really good torque and have a lot of fun with it. The other benefit to VR6s is that they sound amazing. There's almost no cooler sounding engine, maybe other than a 2JZ. If you like 6-cylinder stuff over V8 stuff, that is. 4 cylinders to me all sound pretty much the same, which is pretty whack. And so I wanted that inline 6 sound. The other benefit to a VR6 is they really do run smooth. A KA24 is always going to be a little shaky because it's a 4-cylinder and it doesn't balance out very well. That is a con to the KA, is that it is very improperly balanced from factory. If you replace rod bearings and you don't get the crankshaft balanced, you will have issues and you will spin rod bearings. It's a given. The VR6 is so well balanced and it runs so smooth from factory, you don't have to worry about it. It's just a very good engine. It's basically the European 2J. It's a super crazy engine. That guy with the S14 that I was talking to you guys about earlier, his car actually makes 750 wheel horsepower on a conservative tune and does sub 10-second quarter miles. That is way too much for me. I do not need to go that fast. That's way beyond what I need to do. I believe he only has upgraded the rods. I think the pistons are the exact same as stock because he wanted to keep the compression because I believe he's running 85. But
I won't be. I'll just be running 91 pump gas, which is what we have here in Washington State, and aiming for around 354. It's going to be super fun, and I'm really glad that you guys are going to follow along the way and gain awareness to the VR6 platform, because it's actually a super good platform. I know a lot of Japanese guys who like Japanese cars. I know they're super afraid to hop into the Euro scene because it's so much more complex. And don't get me wrong, it is. The difference between the size, the actual package size, there are a few other benefits as well. A modern, like today in 2020, you can buy a KA24DE full swap. You're gonna be hard pressed to find one for under $1,000. Really, really hard pressed to find a long block for under $1,000 today. They're just getting taxed because more people now are realizing that KA24 is actually a more stout engine than SR20. At least a lot of people that I know are saying that. Just because it doesn't have rocker arms, you don't have to deal with the head. The head is already very efficient. Like, this is an S13 head and this is an S14 head. They're super similar, but you can see that intake port is very, 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 very clean. There's not a lot of turbulence that's going to be happening, and you really cannot upgrade it too much because it's already just so good. You can obviously port match it to the manifold, but pulling out the Dremel and doing that work for maybe a mil and maybe 1 or 2 horsepower maximum is not worth it to me. So I'd much rather, instead of spending, you know, an obscene amount of money on a KA and making 500 wheel horsepower maximum, I'd rather spend $1,000 and have a 400 wheel horsepower VR6 that's reliable all day, every day for, you know, probably half the money. I think just the internals to make a KA24 capable of 500 horsepower are gonna bring you up to darn near $1,400 just for the internals. That doesn't even count for if you don't already have the turbo kit like I do. That's just for the internals to make it capable of over 400 horsepower. And so with that, you can really see why the VR6 is so enticing to me, because I'm familiar with it. I know how it works. I know it's reliable, and I used to be a Euro tech, so I know all the ins and outs of this engine. With the KA, I'm not very familiar with it. I have rebuilt one before in my D21 pickup, but that didn't last very long because I was a really young kid who didn't know what he was doing, and I just slapped rod bearings at it, which was a big mistake. But that's beside the point. I'm just not as familiar with KAs or any Japanese motors because I haven't really worked on very many of them. And so I'd rather stick with what I know, and sticking with what I know is going to be the VR6. I'm really happy to be doing it, and really excited to be making pretty good power out of it too. It's going to be super fun, and I'm really glad that I've decided to go this route.
But anyhow, that is going to be the 240SX with the VR6 turbo build. I'm really, really excited to get this going. I have a few leads currently on a 12 valve VR6 with all the associated goodies. So a complete long block essentially with intake manifold, all the accessories, everything that I would need to make it work. And I also have a lead on a CD009 transmission. But Trevor Couture actually makes the VR6 adapter for this car because he used to run the 6-speed CD009 in a 240SX with a VR6 turbo setup, and he used to drag with that thing, and he was doing almost 10s with the 6-speed, which is really, really impressive for a manual transmission car. So follow me along the way. If you have any tips, if you have any information for me, feel free to shoot it at me. If you have any other suggestions, other than, you know, not doing VR6 turbo, because that is the idea, that is what I'm gonna do. And I'm genuinely excited to make it happen and actually do it properly. I've never built a car to this caliber before. I've had a few like smaller builds, and I've had my hand in a few cool builds, but I've never actually done anything like this for myself. And so I'm really, really excited to actually get into it and make it happen and do something really fun. I don't know what my plans are for the build itself. I know that for sure it has to be a street car, so it must be street legal and it must be reliable and it must be fun to drive first before it does anything else. Who knows? The build is still very early in my thought process of it. It's still very early in the concept stage, I guess you would say. It's going to be a really long process, and I'm not expecting it to happen overnight, and I know it won't. But I do know that putting the VR6 engine into a chassis that already had a 4-cylinder is going to be the best bang for buck as far as I'm concerned. I don't really know of a motor that makes as much sense as a VR6 Swap to me. LS would make sense if it was more affordable in the area that I'm in, and I don't want LS anyway. I think it's way too played out and boring. You can have your LS cars, I'm not interested. You don't see the S14 being used as a universal power plant, not nearly as much as the VR6 at least. Definitely not even close to LS or JZ. The reason that and let's touch on that. So the reason that I'm not going with a 2J, 1J, or 1.5J is because it's so cost inhibitive. In order to get just a standard turbo kit for a 1J head, you got to spend upwards of $2,000, and then spending that money on the 1J really doesn't make sense when you're really only going to be pushing about 500 horsepower, but the cost of entry is so much higher. So that's why I'm avoiding the JZ, even though it would be cool. And I'm not going RB for obvious reasons. It's fun, I guess. It makes good power sometimes, but the same deal. It's just, it's so cost inhibitive too. It's even more expensive than JZ in most applications, in most forms that I see it in, at least. And RB25 just doesn't make sense. It doesn't have the power output or the power potential or the reliability that meets my standards. And I'm also totally unfamiliar with any of those engines that I just listed. So I've done a lot of work on LS stuff, like like as far as like maintenance work and as far as like parts replacing at my old job, but I've never taken one apart or disassembled one. I'm sure it's very simple, and I know that it is lighter than a lot of similar iron 4-cylinders with turbos mounted to them. I know that it's lighter weight, and I know that it makes really good sense too, but like I said, it's mostly the biggest thing for me is bang for buck. I want to have as much fun as I can for as little money as I can. And so now that you know my thoughts on things, like I said before, send me a message on Instagram at 240dude, DOOD, and send me a message, tell me your thoughts, tell me what you think, and also what you would like to see from this channel and exactly what sort of things you want me to touch on when it comes to the VR6 engine versus all of the other, or a lot of the other platforms. I'm not super well versed, but I'm well versed enough to figure out why the VR6 makes sense over the other platforms. And so that's basically going to wrap up this video, and I really appreciate it if you did end up staying to the very end. I know a lot of you probably aren't. This is probably going to be a really long video, but I just wanted to get all of those thoughts and all of those ideas that I had off of my mind and onto somebody, and potentially into somebody else's mind, so they can sort of spitball with me and figure it out. Hopefully the comment section below, if this does end up gaining any traction, hopefully it does, and hopefully people are interested in what's going on, and they're not just going to be like, oh, you should RB swap it, or why wouldn't you do LS the world. I don't care what you want me to do with my car. It's my car. I'm going to do what I want with it, and that's going to be the end of that. And so hopefully that conversation does not start ever at all, period, with this channel. Yeah, but thanks for watching, and thanks for hanging out with me. I know it's been a really weird day hanging out with some weird dude in his garage, but this is what we do here. This is what I enjoy doing, and so this is what I'll continue doing. Thank you so much, and I'll see you around.